We're going to get started. If you want to return to your seats. Class. Class. That's a Cheech and Chong joke. I don't know if anyone got it. It's a different generation. All right, our next speaker, I met this gentleman first online in a Zoom meeting at the University Archives. We were talking about this project that he helped found and has been working on and how it could be expanded to include other parts of the UP and get Northern involved. And it just clicked for me that, wow, this is the perfect person then to ask to be presenting at our conference, the Sonderegger this year. Dr. Donald LaFreniere is the Department Chair of Social Sciences at Michigan Technological University and the Director of the Geospatial Research Facility, which sounds fantastic. He's an Associate Professor of Geography and GIS. He has a PhD in Geography from the University of Western Ontario, a BS in History from Eastern Michigan University, and a BS in Geography from Eastern as well. And his research interests are in environmental change and in urban environments, population health, public participatory GIS, that's what this project is partly about, historical GIS, deep mapping, spatial humanities, deindustrialization and shrinking cities, and many other interests, of course. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you, Dr. Donald LaFreniere.
Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so I really appreciate Dan inviting me to come. I enjoyed the drive in the dark. Looking forward to the time change coming over from Houghton today. So I'm very excited to introduce all of you to the Keweenaw Time Traveler. This is very dear to my heart and is something that a lot of us have been working on. So it's really exciting to kind of introduce this part of the UP to this project because I think there's some energy and interest in expanding this to this part of the UP. So the Keweenaw Time Traveler is what we call an online deep map. And what it's really doing is trying to enable the interpretations of past lives and environments in the Keweenaw by connecting both the public and researchers with ways of understanding and recreating the past of the region. And deep mapping, this academic idea about trying to represent the complexities of sort of not necessarily everyday life, but the complexities of the ways in which we live, right? Understanding that people live in places and they have relationships with their environments, and that changes through time, okay? And we've seen some of that already in the presentations today. And so that's really what the Keweenaw Time Traveler is trying to do, is to link people to the places they lived in, they worked and went to school through time from about the 1880s through to the present. So you all know where the Keweenaw is, so I don't need to get into that. But as we try to tell our funders, it's a really important region because it's the oldest and one of the largest copper mining regions in the world. So this idea of deep mapping is really, really hard. It's really challenging. And when we set off to create this project, really what we started off with was a recognition that we have a lot of historical information sitting in archives around the Keweenaw, largely in small community-run heritage organizations at the counties, at different municipalities, by different heritage partners, and that we can't use all of it and we can't access all of it, and so how do we start with sort of this universe of stuff that is sitting in archives, what we call the universe of data, and turn it into what we call the deep map prime, which is what is it that we're going to be the primary information that we're going to start with, to then be able to allow individuals to come in, access that information digitally, which I'll show you here in a few minutes, and be able to create their own what we call spatial narratives, their own stories about their memories, their understanding, their heritage of the Keweenaw, okay? And so when we did that, the project sort of started by creating two projects that kind of ran together. So the first one we call, it's this very academic term called the Copper Country Historical Spatial Data Infrastructure. And what that is really a way of taking a lot of maps and data about people and the environments of the past and linking it together. And we do that to be able to study lots of different things. So yesterday I had a master's thesis defense of one of my students who was studying how children, the risk to children in industrial cities, using Keweenaw and Laurium as our example, how living in Keweenaw and Laurium was risky to children over time in their health and their well-being. So that's the kinds of projects we do using the historical spatial data infrastructure. The concert part of the project is the public-facing piece, which we call the Keweenaw Time Traveler. And so that's this online interactive deep map that gives an opportunity for lots of different ways to engage with the history and heritage of the region. So you can explore maps and data through time. You can search for where people, for individual people, addresses, historical places and place names, as well as stories. And we're going to talk a bit about these stories, but there's tools built within the Keweenaw Time Traveler for anyone, anywhere, to tell their own story, linked automatically to the places and the time and the people that are embedded within those stories. Okay? And so all of that is what we call public participatory deep mapping. So when we started the project, we first started off by sort of making this call for citizen historians. And this here is Antonia Burrich. She's our Citizen Historian of the Year, and I forget what year that was. I don't think we put the date on the plaque, but it was something like 2017. And what we did first was build a number of applications that engaged folks with helping us get information into the Time Traveler. And so doing things like transcribing information that you can find on historical maps that computers can't do very well, classifying how buildings were being used, and how different buildings, what the building materials, so the architectural styles and different materials that go into a building. And we did a lot of work at, we went to a lot of festivals. We were at Pasty Fest and Bridge Fest, and we have all these festivals, as I'm sure you do here in Marquette, in the Keweenaw. And we would engage with all different groups, different ages. We did things like scan-a-thons, where people would bring in their photographs historical photographs of the region, and we would scan them and help them map those photographs. And really just got people to understand how using maps and information is one way of understanding the heritage of the region. So this is a really big project with a lot of partners, and so our home is the Historical Environment Spatial Analytics Lab at Michigan Tech, which I direct. And then these are some of our partners that we work with very closely. So a number of the heritage sites and historical societies in our region, as well as the Keweenaw Museum of the Carnegie Museum of the Keweenaw, and the Keweenaw National Historical Park Advisory Commission. And it's a project that involves a lot of people with lots of different types of expertise. So I'm here as the director of the project, but really this is a project that involves a lot of different people. And so there's been, to date, about 60 students who have worked on the project, about 8 faculty members, and then a lot of public contributions. And so this is just the sort of very active group that's working right now, but this has changed a lot over the years. So the project started in 2014 with a small grant from Michigan Tech to assist our heritage partners with scanning and what we call georeferencing historical maps. So this was a partnership with us and the Michigan Tech Archives to take a number of maps, really, and I'll show you some of these maps in a minute, take a number of maps and basically place them in a computer in a way that allows you to see how a historical map is related to today's geography. Okay, that's what georeferencing is about. So we spent a couple years doing that, and then we got our first grant from National Endowment for the Humanities as well as from the Keweenaw National Historical Park Advisory Commission, to really start building those initial applications that I showed you, and to start up public programming, and to really build the base of what becomes the Time Traveler. Then the next couple phases for the next couple of years, one was related specifically to children's health, and through some funding from the Portage Health Foundation. And then the Council on Library and Information Resources, we are just finishing up this project where we are mapping where every single miner who worked for the Keweenaw and Hecla Mining Company, where they worked, where they lived, and information about their employment history, their injury history, their health and well-being over time, and so forth. So we're just finishing that phase. And then this is the phase we're in right now. And so in our current phase of the project, again, through some support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, we are making all these linkages. And I'm going to show you these linkages when I show you the live project on the web here. But these are trying to link people through time to their different environments so we can see where people move. We can see as immigrants come into the region, as they leave the region, as the region deindustrializes and we lose population. And also linking people to different spaces throughout their day. So it's not just where they live at home, but also where they went to school and where they went to work. We're working on church records and some other parts of of people's daily lives. Another big part of the current phase of the project, which we're really just starting this month, is to help make the project replicable for other communities to do the same thing. And I think that's part of the conversations that I had with some folks here at Northern about how could we take this and expand it to do this here in Marquette. And so I've been sort of on a road show, it feels like, for the last 3 months talking about the Time Traveler, because I think when you see it, you'll appreciate why, but there's a lot of interest in doing this in a lot of other communities. And so I was in Madrid, I was in London, I was in Copenhagen, New York, New Orleans, Montreal, showing communities how we can do this. Okay, so this is what we have right now in the Time Traveler. About 630,000 records, almost 20 million variables about the people and places and environments in the region, using all these different kinds of sources. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. I just want to show you sort of how we built it. So first was that idea of georeferencing. So this is putting historical maps on top of present geographies. So we did that for about 1,100 different maps using primarily these maps called Sanborn fire insurance plans. And these were maps that were made to assess fire risk in the late 19th, early to mid 20th centuries. We then did something called digitizing, basically computerized the built environment. So this is all the buildings, railroads, factories, structures. And we did that through a three-summer high school internship program where we were teaching high school youth how to use computer mapping technologies and learn about the heritage of their region at the same time. And so this is us working with the youth both out in the field and in the computer lab. We then brought in city directories. City directories are like historical phone books, but they were before there were phones primarily. They listed where people lived, worked, and their occupations. And so we brought in 7 different time periods for Houghton and Keweenaw counties and did some computer science wizardry that I don't understand, but computer scientists know how to do it. We had to then parse those things and get them into, again, the computer scientists make this slide. I don't even know what all this means. But basically, we brought it all together and were able to map most of the people from the city directories. And then the big challenge was bringing in the census. And so we partner with IPUMS USA, and IPUMS is at the Minnesota Population Center, and it's a large research think tank that is actually trying to take all of the paper records for all of the censuses around the entire world and make them available for communities to use. And so the U.S. Census from 1880 to 1940 is already mapped for every single person. Or it's not mapped, I'm sorry, but is already digitized so that we can pull down the census for anywhere in the United States between those time periods. The challenge is no one's ever mapped it before. And so we had to come up with a new way of figuring out how to map historical censuses in, hundreds of thousands of people at a time. And so that was what we worked on. That was primarily our pandemic project. And so we mapped everyone basically to 4 geographies. Most people are mapped to their individual buildings that they actually lived in that were derived from that high school internship program. If we couldn't find the building, and of course there's some sort of mismatch sometimes between the year that we have information for and the census year, then we would map them to their street. If we couldn't do that, we would put them, especially for rural communities, we would put them in sort of the centroid of their small rural communities, and worst case scenario, everybody's at least to their enumeration district. Okay, but everybody's mapped. And then we had school records, which this was a pleasure to work with. The Calumet, Laurium, and Keweenaw School District thankfully called us while they were cleaning out some basement storage lockers and said, we found all these records from the schools that we had, and there were a whole bunch of schools. There were at that point there were 21 schools in Calumet and Laurium in its heyday, and we have all the records from late 19th century through to about 1950. What do we do with them? I was like, well, first of all, they got to go in the archive. So they got to get in the archive. But can we scan them first and map them all? They're like, yeah, let's do that. So we did that, and so we mapped every single student, and both to their school and to their home. And this stuff has really neat information. Oh no, this is the school. Yeah, the school records. So we have the students' names, their ages, their date of birth, all their grades. But then we also have information about the days missed, if they're vaccinated or not, when they left school, primarily to go to work. Or to come home and help the family. And then there's usually some information about sort of the students' behavior and demeanor and that kind of thing. And so this was really the genesis of a lot of the work that my master's student just finished working with. So we brought all those in, and then this here on the right, which I'm sure you can't see too far back, maybe I have another image of it. No, I don't, is the Calumet and Hecla mining employee records. Which we're working on right now, which has a lot of demographic information about them, but what's really neat is it tells us where they used to work prior to working for CNH, which is really interesting. You don't normally get that information. Where they used to live before they moved to the Keweenaw. And then it's not on this particular image, but their entire employment history, as well as some basic health information about those workers and their families. So then we linked all this stuff together through something called probabilistic record linkage, which is basically running computer algorithms to figure out that this John Smith is the same as this John Smith, and this Jane Doe is the same as this Jane Doe, and link all this information together. And when we do that, we get all these records together through time, and there's about 245,000 links across all these different people. Okay, so this is like a big data project. All right. So now let me show you what it looks like. Now we did all that. Here's a big QR code if you want to follow along. And I'll put this up as well. So let me load this up here. Okay, so this is the landing page for the Keweenaw Time Traveler. So when you arrive, you basically have 2 options. You can search for someone, if you know who you're looking for, or an address, or a story, or a place, or you can just go and explore around. So I'll just explore around a little bit just so I can show you how this kind of looks. It always looks a little funny on a projector, so I have to just adjust this. Okay. So these little black dots here are just kind of showing you where there's more information available. Here, I gotta do this again. Okay. So the darker the dot, it means we have more information at that particular location. So I'll bring you in here to Calumet and Laurium, for example. So I want to get a little bit closer it'll ask me what year I want to look at. So I'm going to pick something around the 19 teens, okay? Okay, there's a lot going on here, right? Okay, I'll just zoom in. So this gives you a little bit of an idea about the kind of maps we're looking at. So these maps here are showing you, these are each individual buildings, and the colors here tell you what the building's made out of. So the pink color tells you it's made out of brick, the yellow is made out of wood, the blue ones are made out of stone, for us primarily Jacobsville sandstone, okay? And then all these little icons tell you that we have some information about something happening in that building. And so the ones that are sort of this purple color tell you we have information about the building. The ones that kind of look like a little storybook means that there's a story about that particular location. And then these ones here mean that we have lots of information about that particular place. It usually means we know something about people and the building, and maybe there's a story there too. And then you can, whoops, I gotta change this over here. There's lots of different maps to use, and you can just see how it changes through time. So this is what it looked like in 1917, and this is what it looks like today, okay, to give you an idea, all right? Well, I'll go over here and I'll show you, let's see, I'll pick a story here of an individual. This is Angelina Arco. She was 10 years old. This is her home. And so over here on the left, I can see that this is her address. And we actually, because we have all these information linked together, we actually know a lot about her. So she was 10 in the 1920 census, 13 based on some school records we had for her in 1918, okay? Because not every historical record has the same information. We can see when she was born in Michigan, 1907. Her father's from Yugoslavia. She's single, she's only 10. And she's a daughter. And she attended school, and we can see that she was in grade 5 at the Webster School, and Bertha Humphreys was her teacher. Okay, and we can continue to go on and get some more information about her. Okay, but what we can also do is come over here to related content, and we can see the rest of her family. So here's information about Angelina's family, and if we were to click on any of those individuals, it would tell us some information about her family. Here's her classmates. So if you want to see who her classmates were in grade 5 in 1918, here's all of her classmates, and we can click on each of those people and get information about them. Oops. And then here's the 5 people that she lives with, which is not always the family, okay? And so these are the 5 people that she lives with at the same location. We also have information about her home. So this is her home. And if I click this, it would tell us a bit about the building she was living in. And this is her school. And if we click that, it would show us some information about her school. Okay. I can also click here, for example, show on map, which actually was a bug that was not working the other day, so I shouldn't have done that. It normally would have showed you where her school is. And then there's stories sometimes. So in this one in particular, there's a story about the tenement building she was living in. And so a user had written a story about this tenement building for 81 residents, and it talks about, it was called Butler Row, and here's a picture of it. Okay. So actually, this particular picture is kind of a mashup of a historical picture and a contemporary picture. This is our old passenger rail station, and the Butler Row apartment tenement building is actually that building in the background there. Okay. And so that's, and then if you want, you can just change the time period you're looking at. So if you wanted to see, for example, this particular tenement building here that she lived in at a different time period, you just kind of use the slider along the top here, and you'll see that by 1939, it's no longer there. Okay? And so this is the kind of ways in which people use the time traveler, is one, to look at people and follow these people through time and understand their family histories, understand the immigration history of particular groups, to tell their stories and information, but also to see how the region has changed through time. And so this share a story button here, I'll just go back to a different map. If I wanted, and I know something else about the Butler Row tenements, for example, I could click this share related story button, and this is where you can put in a title, a time frame, some text. You can upload some pictures or videos or oral histories, and now your story gets attached to Angelina, everyone else who lived in the tenement buildings, and the other stories that we have about those individuals. Okay? Okay, so that gives you a little taste of what the time traveler can do. Something we're really excited about with the time traveler is this ability to tell spatial narratives and storytelling, because we think, you know, and I was listening to the story about the trail, you know, you're talking about the trail, and I'm thinking to myself, yes, right. We could take the app and we could tell stories as we're walking along this trail, and people could tell their own stories. And that's sort of where we're at with this sort of the next phase of the time traveler, is we just launched this week a mobile version, which finally works. It's so exciting. So if you open it up on your phone, this is the kind of thing you can do. And so this is just an example of, this is actually our sort of economic think tank hub thing called MyTech. It's right at the Portage Lake Lift Bridge in the Upper Loop. And it used to be an UPCO power station, for example, okay? That has been adaptively repurposed. And so you could, when you're in the app, you can click the button here, and it will use the GPS in your phone and put a little dot on the map so you can see where you are. And then you can pick a historical map and see what that location looked like when you were there at whatever time period you want to look at. You can see what was there. So if you're standing at a ruin of a building or a vacant lot, you can see what used to be there. Or in this case, you're standing in front of this building that's like an economic incubator, you can see it used to be a power station, okay? And then you can tell stories. And so this is the story of, for example, the powerhouse that someone told, Carl, I'm not sure how to say Carl's last name. Yeah, Fronchek. And he, I'm guessing, really enjoys the architecture of this particular building because he included a bunch of pictures of it. Okay. We also have already found that people are using it for something that's not explicitly what we think of as heritage, but I think it is, right? And so this was actually out in Frida at the old iron dam there in Frida, and they went out in the Red Ridge Dam, that's what it's called, and they went out and took pictures and put it in the time traveler about getting engaged. Okay. Okay, so just to wrap up, so we have time for questions. The time traveler, again, is really kind of got two aims. So one is this sort of research and preservation capacity building, and so it's supporting a lot of different kinds of research in things like immigration and architectural history, environmental history, but also heritage preservation and interpretation. We used a lot with high school and middle school curriculums in the region to teach the history of the Copper Country. It's all intended to be sort of publicly and research accessible, so all the data is open source and available if you know how to kind of use those technologies. It's been from a scholarly perspective, we've done a lot of work with it, a lot of publications about how we built it, how you use it, different ways it supports different kinds of scholarship. Lots of students work on it. Like I mentioned, about 48 university students and 65 high school students have learned about GIS, public history, heritage, and spatial humanities through the project. We've had about, 17, it's hard to quantify these things, but something around 1,700 one-on-one conversations at festivals and public talks and workshops like this. Lots of different stories about it on the radio and TV and so forth. We've had about 300,000 different classifications and transcriptions in those apps that we had at the first phase of the project. About 1,300 different stories are now being told or have been told and are available in the Time Traveler. And we get about, last year we had 58,000 different people using it on the website, which is really neat. So what are we doing next? Bringing those employee records, like I mentioned, and working on continued refinement. The version I just showed you just launched over the summer. It's very complex, and we're continuing to find little bugs and things, so we're still kind of working on refining that user experience to make it a little bit better. We have a lot of educational programming coming up. We have a curriculum development workshop with local educators here in the next week or two, and some other. We do a lot of sort of intergenerational learning opportunities. So we go to various retirement communities, and we work with seniors who work with teens who. The teens get to learn about the history of the region, and the seniors tell their stories, and we take those stories and put them in the Time Traveler, for example, so we can get those oral histories and knowledge of the past. And then the main thing we're working on this year is a number of webinar series and documentation and dissemination so that we can help other communities build one for themselves. And so that's really our efforts this year, is to create a webinar series that tells you how to do the technology, how to work with your local archive, how to the sort of technical information you need to know, how do you link people together, how do you map them, how do you build the whole thing, okay? So this is all of our partners and funders, and so thank you very much, appreciate it.
Wow, fantastic. This is so next level, it's off the hook. I'm going to start with this gentleman here.
Could you trace that 15 or 12-year-old girl through her whole life?
Not her whole life yet. We're working on that.
That'd be cool.
But to the 1950s.
Okay.
Yeah, to the 1950s. But we're working with very slow beginnings with the History Center in Lansing to bring in death records.
Okay.
So that we can follow people to their end of life. So I have a student right now who's doing it with some of our local cemeteries as a starting point to see how we do it. But yeah, that's the long-term goal, but we're not there yet.
That'd be so neat.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a couple questions about the 1,300 stories you mentioned.
Yep.
Do you have any word limits on the texts?
Theoretically, yeah, but it's pretty big, like thousands of words.
Do you have
So-
any editing process to kind of prevent rambling narratives?
No. That's the question that comes up every time we talk about the project. So if I can expand on that for just a moment, which is to say that was a really big decision when sort of the public historians on the project and we have a bunch of computer scientists who are sort of experts in like making apps and things usable for people, sort of human-centered design. And we really struggled at the beginning of the project thinking, okay, we hope this grows and we don't have the capacity to curate everything. We don't want to curate things. We want people to feel comfortable telling the stories that they want to tell. But the question always comes up is, what if somebody says something that's wrong? And so in our region, there's a very contested story about something that happened at the Italian Hall in Calumet. And it's still part of the contested narrative in the community now. What happened that night? And who was at fault? And it was during the strike and the big labor strike in 1913. And so we said, well, not all history is authoritative. People have different ways of remembering the past, different ways of telling stories. Nothing is wrong. So what we've done was we built the storytelling interface so that everything can be put into it. We do have some algorithms that look for profanity, If somebody uploads a nude picture or something like that, it will pull that out. And then there's a flagging function. So if another individual comes in and finds something that seems inappropriate, they hit a little flag button, we get an email. It gets automatically pulled off the site instantly. And then we get an email, and we basically then manually review them. But we get like less than 2 flags a month. It's really pretty rare. But editing we don't have, and that's one thing that we're trying to figure out a way to do that, because we also made a conscious decision to not require a login, because we all hate logins. And so instead of making a login, you could just use it, but that also means there's no way for you to go back and edit your thing. So we're trying to find that balance.
One more
Yeah, please.
question. If you have recordings of oral stories, do you have transcripts of that story available?
No.
Because I know personally, I sometimes don't want to be hostage to somebody's 10-minute long story. I'd rather
Yeah.
glance through the text and get the key points.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, for some of the oral histories that we've been working with our archival partners, like the ones they've had in their repositories and we're bringing in, those we have transcripts for. But, if an individual just tells their history and it ends up in there, we don't have a way to do the transcription. Good question, though.
I'm Marcus Robbins, University Archivist here at Northern. I wanted everybody to know that the Upper Peninsula Digital Network is working very closely with Don to hopefully bring Northern into this project. Like Dan said, it's light years ahead of what we're trying to do with the Uplink project. But we do have faculty on campus that have committed to working with us and to work with him to try to upgrade Uplink to something like the Time Traveler. So which leads me to my question, Don. How did you get the grant funding that you used? Was it used in part to do backfill or pay for faculty? You had 88 faculty working on this project. I assume it was from multiple disciplines.
Right.
Did the grant
Yep.
pay for you to do this? So did you have release time?
Yeah.
How did that work
Yeah,
exactly?
most of it goes to students, and that's just my philosophy on these things. But there was funding that did fund some of my time, especially at the beginning when we're getting it going, some of the computer scientists' time and some of the historians' times, yeah.
And then a different question, much of the material that you noted that was up here, we do have in the archives, but a lot of it we don't. One good example are the employee cards for the Calumet and Hecla.
Sure.
The similar records do exist. Unfortunately, they are not here at the University Archives. They're in another institution.
Right.
And that institution is reluctant to let us use those or digitize those materials. Do you have any suggestions on how we might overcome that reluctance?
Yeah. That's always a hard one. There's, as an archivist, I know you struggle with this all the time, is the argument we made both to our funders and to our archive partners, and some of them were also reluctant for us to come in and work on making these records so publicly accessible. The argument is to say to your reluctant partner, you're going to make the stories and this information that unless someone knows where these collections are, they're not going to be able to access them. If we make them accessible and people can learn about them, they're going to want to learn more. And they're going to come into your archive, they're come into your museum, wherever they are, and they're going to want to patronize you because they now have an interest in this case, I'm assuming it's like iron workers of some type, right? Iron mining workers of some type. That now they want to learn more, right? And that's one thing we try to do a lot. It's not there yet, but eventually you'll be able to see the actual archival record that all those come from. You just click on it, and when you're in that left-hand pane, and you'll see the actual archival record. And already, from the limited amount that we have in the public site, people are already calling the MTU archives, the Houghton County Historical Society, and saying, like, where, can we see more? What else do you have? And I think that's the way that you tell a reluctant partner, because often the reluctancy is, well, if we make this accessible on the internet, then people aren't going to come and visit us anymore. It's like, in fact, I think it's the opposite. Okay, it spurs curiosity, gives people access to historical information that they otherwise wouldn't seek out. They wouldn't know that was available. They wouldn't know how to engage with it. And that's really what we're trying to do, is by mapping it all, it makes it under something that people can kind of wrap their hands around. So, yeah.
We have couple more questions here.
Thanks. I think what you're doing is fantastic. And in terms of the resources that you're using, I know in my own home county of Iron County, Wisconsin, during the 1930s, there was a project to map out the ecology of the entire county done by young people who were on relief. And I'm wondering if that was done in Houghton County, because the maps that were made are at the Iron County Register of Deeds office. I hope they're still there in Hurley, and they're incredibly detailed maps of cherry trees and elm trees that were done by young people. I don't know if it was part of the NYA or whatever, but you may want to check on that source. And then also the reports of the Dillingham Commission, which studied immigrants in the around 1910, 1911, are very detailed for the mining communities of the Lake Superior region. And I'm wondering also, when you're looking at censuses, do you have census information from the 1890 census? Because some of you may know that there was a fire in the Commerce Building about 1921, and most of those census records were destroyed. So do you have those?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for those resources, and I was not familiar with that particular report, so I'll get the name from you again afterwards, and I'll have to look that up. 1890, no, we don't have any census records either, and so that's a gap. The whole country has that gap. And so the city directories somewhat fill in that gap. We don't have as much information on the directories as the census would have, but at least we still kind of know where people were living. So yeah, we suffer from that same fate with those census records.
And also, too, the research that you're doing, to me, is so invaluable, and not merely from a historical aspect, but if we want to know what's happening to our communities. The sociologist in me would like to knock on doors and ask people, where do you live? Where are you from? What's your educational attainment? What kind of work do you do, et cetera? And there, one way would be to start now and go backwards, and you're starting and going forward. So eventually you will, maybe you are already, ending up right at the present moment with people, spaces, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, one project we're working on, like actual research project, for example, is to look at the ability of immigrants to be socially mobile. So to be able to basically come and live the American dream and set up roots and start companies and sort of have a better life for themselves. And so we've been using that data to look at what characteristics allowed certain groups to come into a community and be more successful than other groups. And that applies still today to immigrants as we see coming into our country. So, yes, sir.
I'd just like to make a general comment. I've always thought that the Copper Country has done a wonderful job, even before any of this, and this is absolutely fabulous. But the Copper Country has had a sense of history, which I do not, and I've taught and written UP history. There is really no place in the UP, except in the Copper Country, where the sense of history is very strong. And I know people from Marquette County are going to kick me around and say, no, you're absolutely wrong. I still stand by that. It's you, and this is like the capstone, and you're building even more.
Well, thank you.
On that.
Well, I'll tell you, you may get it in my inflections and my accent a little bit. I'm not from around here. So I'm Canadian, and I came here from Ontario 9 years ago now. And that's what brought me here, was I was doing a project like this in London, Ontario, and I got an opportunity to, faculty position opened up at Michigan Tech, and I came up for a visit, and that's exactly what they did. Was they drove me around, and I got to meet so many people in the heritage community in the Copper Country, and I'm like, how could I not move here? I mean, this place is cool. These people love this stuff. Plus, it's a living landscape. It's all around us everywhere we go, right? And so, yeah, it's a blessed place to be doing a project like this.
I'd like to make a comment on the value of this. I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, eating pasties and meat pies because my mother was born in Tamarack City in 1919. Well, we found out my grandmother was born in Hubble in 1896. So we went up there a couple years ago in Lindsay at the Tech Archives, pulled out the records and the Polk directories, and realized both my great-grandfathers and my grandfather all worked at the mills up there. Sure. We found 4 of our family homes from what she found in the directories. And the work records were really fascinating because it said all the mills they worked at. Yep. My great-grandfather was head feeder at the Quincy Mill. I don't even know what that job was, but I'm sure it was hard.
I'm sure it was hard.
But what was interesting is on the backs of those work records, they had to sign that I am not a member of the Western Federation of Miners. Yes, so that was after the strike. But this was before you really got into this whole thing. And Lindsay up there just opened up a whole nother world to me. Yeah. So it's a very great project you're doing.
Oh, yeah. Lindsay's working very closely with us on this project. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great experience of, yeah.
So Don, I have a question for you.
Sure.
How much is this project, I mean, like Northern, we're constantly trying to get students to come here and recruit students. How much is this project driving recruitment for your program, for your social science program, and also the industrial history? It's the master's program or PhD?
Yeah, we have a master's and PhD in industrial heritage and archaeology. So it's definitely been encouraging a lot of interest in that program. Undergraduates, less so. We really struggle. Well, we also want to recruit students, just like Northern does. And we really struggled getting past this idea that all we do is engineering at Michigan Tech on the undergraduate side. So where I think the biggest recruitment happens for us to the Department of Social Sciences is that we end up retaining a lot of students. So students who come up to Michigan Tech, get attracted to us as an institution to do engineering, realize that engineering is not for them and they want to come to the bright side of campus, they end up finding a project like this, and now they can use their technical skills in a way that allows them to get a degree in history or anthropology or sustainability science or the various other things we do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to comment Marcus's comments that this is beyond what they're doing with Uplink. I don't agree because I think Uplink is such an important project, Marcus. You really are opening up what it is an opportunity for local historical societies to get their material out there too. And also for us to know what's out there, to have a central database, which is always the issue. I, as a heritage and museum guy, one thing I've been telling people for years now is that we have to stop looking at what we do as being about attracting people to our place. What we do is bigger than our buildings. It's bigger than our museum. And this is a perfect example, along with Uplink and other projects, that we're looking outside of the museum building and attracting people because our missions are bigger than our buildings. So, are there any other comments, questions? All right, Don, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We're going to take a little break, and then we'll have our keynote speaker at 11:10.